While the world rightly focuses attention on the coronavirus, another plague, this one of biblical proportions, is sweeping East Africa. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is Breakpoint. At one point in its history, most likely in the century after the return from the Babylonian exile, a swarm of locusts descended on Judah and ate everything in sight. That is, after all, what locusts do. The calamity was the setting for the prophetic oracles that are contained in the book of Joel. In the first part of that book, the prophet laments the damage done by the swarm and then calls on God's people to mourn, not only for their loss, but also for their sins. If they do, the prophet proclaims God would restore the years the locusts have eaten. Locusts and leprosy are the quintessential biblical calamities. Few of us in the West have ever experienced either of those personally, but in some parts of the world, they're more than familiar. In fact, right now, upwards of 13 million people in East Africa face famine as the result of locust swarms. Now, note that I said not a swarm, but swarms, plural, some covering more than 900 square miles and containing up to 80 million individual bugs. And one day, they can consume as many crops as would provide food for 35,000 people. This current plague of locusts originated in the southern Arabian Peninsula, where heavy rainfall provided ideal breeding conditions, and then prevailing winds carried them to East Africa. From there, the locusts have spread into other areas, including South Sudan and the Turkana region of Kenya, both of which already struggling with the effects of prolonged drought. And there's more. By some estimates, if weather conditions are right, the swarms could increase by 500 times by June. And making efforts to eradicate the swarms even more difficult is the fact that one of their preferred breeding sites is controlled by the Somali Islamist group Al-Shabaab. Still, in the midst of all this suffering, there are lights in the darkness, such as the group Mary's Meals. Now, you might have guessed from the name that the group is named after Jesus' mother. Mary's Meals founder, Magnus McFarland Barrow, is a devout Catholic who, before founding the group, spent years as a salmon farmer. After hearing about the refugee crisis created by the Bosnian War, Magnus and his brother Fergus drove a truck all the way from Scotland to Bosnia loaded with relief supplies. Their initial running, or in this case driving, towards what other people were fleeing from, led to the creation of Mary's Meals, whose vision is very simple. Every child receives one daily meal in their place of education. Now that might sound modest, but one meal makes a huge difference long term, with a measurable impact on school enrollment, attendance, and performance, especially in poorer countries. Today, the group feeds 1.3 million children around the world, including 20,000 in Turkana. 17% of all school children in Malawi are fed by Mary's Meals. Their efforts are in stark contrast to those of the national government in places like Kenya, which are accused by critics of only thinking about crisis areas during election time. The action of Christian groups like Mary's Meals and others are pretty much all that stands between an awful lot of people and mass starvation. And that was true even before this new plague of locusts. A crisis of biblical proportions like this demands a response by God's people, specifically running into, not away from, the plague. Thank God that's what Christians have done throughout history. Thank God that's what's happening today. But what can we do so far away? Of course, we can pray. That matters a lot. And we can also spread the word. Amazingly, people can watch cable news all day, not that they should, and still not be aware of this calamity of biblical proportions. We can also urge our leaders to help those that are affected. And finally, we ourselves can be generous and support organizations like Mary's Meals and others who provide this sort of care to those who need it the most. Come to Breakpoint.org. We'll link you to them and some other organizations. Again, Breakpoint.org. For Breakpoint, I'm John Stonestreet.